Hey, folks, welcome to Behind the Headlines. Thanks for joining me. I'm Lee Camp. And today I am talking about Alex Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat kidnapped by the United States. We're going to dig deep on this topic. It's so rarely covered in your mainstream media. I mean, barely at all, really. And when it is, it's just heavily bullshit propaganda. So let's get the real truth on this topic. One of the most important political prisoners the U.S. currently has in our jails. And to talk about this, I have someone who is now kind of an expert on it, Alex Suarez Brown. He wrote a book called The Diplomat, all about this issue, about Alex Saab. And I have him here for you guys today. Please make sure to click subscribe, click share. All of those things help. We are heavily suppressed, so it kind of comes down to you guys letting other people know about this. And please leave a comment, even if you got nothing to say, because it helps us in our battle, our endless battle against the algorithms. All right, so without further ado, here is Alex Suarez Brown. Hello.
Hi, Lee. Just to clarify, I am Alex Suarez, but my Twitter handle says Brown in the Empire because I'm brown skinned.
Oh, okay. Because I'd always known you as Alex Suarez, but then I looked at your Twitter and it said Dash Brown. And so I was like, all right, maybe he changed his name. I don't know. All right. Sorry about that. Alex Suarez, thank you for joining me. And this is a big topic that gets so little coverage. And I just wanted to do a deeper dive on it. So I'm glad you're here. So let's kind of lead into where we are now. So let's begin early and kind of really explain it, because I think even for people that are kind of into news, into censored news, many of them still may not even know the name Alex Saab. So I think we need to begin at kind of the very beginning. Who is he, and what was he doing in the lead up to before the U.S. kidnapped him?
Yeah, so I'm more of a writer than a journalist, so I'm going to both get into his biography and also my own experience and how I encountered Alex Saab's case. So I'll start out with how I got involved. So around 2021, a few months into his kidnapping in Cape Verde, and I'll get into how all that happened. But I really felt inspired to investigate and eventually advocate for the plight of Alex Saab in the summer of 2021, when John and Gabriel Shipton, who are the father and half brother of Julian Assange, came to Miami. That was their first stop in the United States, and I met with them. And the first thing I asked them when I saw them is, "Have you heard of Alex Saab?" And they both said no. And then you see a few weeks later, Anya Pirinpil sits down in an interview with Gabriel Shipton, and he starts talking about Alex Saab. And then weeks progress, and suddenly one of the most respected jurists in the world, Baltasar Garzon, a Spanish jurist who is part of the international defense team for Julian Assange, becomes a lawyer for Alex Saab. So very exciting things transpire. I get more and more interested in the case. As you know, in 2019, I was one of the embassy protectors working on the outside to try to bring food and supplies into our comrades that were inhabiting that embassy, protecting that embassy.
Yeah, and let me just remind people that was the embassy in D.C. Where they basically stole it from Venezuela. The U.S. did, by claiming that Juan Guaido was the leader of Venezuela, so therefore Maduro and his government had no right to the embassy. So people, American citizens, basically held that space for the legit Venezuelan government. And it lasted for, 2 months, essentially. And eventually the final remaining 4 were arrested.
Absolutely. And it is related to this because Trump back then, like when he captured Alex Saab, was not respecting international law, was not respecting the availability of that building, of that embassy. And under Biden, you've seen a similar agenda when it comes to people that stand up to the U.S. empire and their sanctions, like Alex Saab has as a diplomat. And we'll get into that. And I consider it a victory, by the way, because that building remained vacant the puppet regime of Guaido was never able to be installed in that building. So even though the four were arrested and it was shut down, the building remained vacant, and the U.S. Empire did not accomplish their goal at that time because of our solidarity and our unity at that time. And I wrote a book about that too, about the embassy protecting. So, yeah.
And in court, even though they may have ultimately found against Kevin Zeese, Margaret Flowers, Dave, and Adrian Pine, David Paul, they succeeded in making the court and the U.S. government look like fools. I mean, it was quite clear in those court proceedings that,
remember, Kevin was a lawyer too, so he knew how to use the law to their advantage. Yeah.
It was quite clear in those proceedings that the court didn't understand who Juan Guaido was or why they were claiming a different president. They were ill-advised on how to deal with this.
And while I was attending the hearings at that time in D.C., it made me think when I was going to the hearings in Miami, you heard a lot of the same legal jargon from the state and how they're justifying these, clear violations of international law. But anyways, so the Venezuelans started recognizing my efforts when they found out what I did at the Venezuelan embassy. When my book about the embassy protecting got translated to Spanish, I got more and more attention down in Caracas. And so subsequently, I was invited for the first time to go to Venezuela as an election observer in November of 2021. And that's when I met face-to-face. I didn't know I was going to meet her. I met with Camila Fabri de Saab, who is the wife of Alex Saab, very brave woman. And, I was just moved, and I was one of the few Americans that was able to be invited down to Venezuela. And I live in the state. I reside in the state where her husband is kidnapped. So I felt the personal responsibility. And I made a promise to her that November that I was going to do everything I could for her husband to be freed, who's a hero. And we'll get into why he's a hero and how he saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And the torture that he went through and incredible dignity that he has. But I've attended every single hearing. I had to drive several hours to live in a whole other part of Florida. He's down in Miami. But I've attended, at times being the only one in the courtroom. But on his side, full of, right-wing journalists and people that oppose Alex Saab. But we started getting numbers on his side too over the past few months. But yeah, I've attended every preliminary hearing. And now it's starting to get more attention. But yeah, back in 2021, even high-profile people like Assange's family never heard of Alex Saab. Now he's getting a lot more attention. Like I said earlier, in case you're just coming in now, one of the most respected jurists in the world, Garzón, he's the one that made the arrest warrant against Pinochet. When Pinochet back in the 90s was under protection from Thatcher, he was visiting Britain. He was going to return to Chile. He couldn't leave the country because of the arrest warrant on behalf of Chileans with Spanish citizenship because of Garzón. So he's a very respected jurist, and he got through Assange was able to find out about Alex Saab. It's a very important case. So now I'm going to take me out of the equation and go right into his biography and what happened. Unless you had a question first.
No. I want to hear about kind of where he came from and how he ended up in Cape Verde being grabbed by authorities.
Sure. And people can also learn more through my book and through Adriana Parada's book about Alex Saab. If you want, I can send you that information after the show. You could maybe put the link up, the links up. But let me get into what happened with him. So he's the type of guy that works behind the scenes. He doesn't like to take credit for things. This makes him even more heroic in my eyes. But he wasn't really known in Venezuela, not because he wasn't important, because he's a diplomat that likes to work behind the scenes and uses his business connections in the Middle East to try to find ways to bring food, medicine, and oil to a desperately needed nation. According to the UN, as of 2020, of course, those numbers have gone up. At least 100,000 civilians have been killed by U.S. sanctions. That's a nation in Venezuela of only 28 million people. That's like killing 30 million Americans, per capita.
Per capita.
So it's very significant.
Yeah, and I definitely, people probably know this because I've talked about it a lot, but sanctions do actually kill people. And that 100,000 number is not just some number you're making up that's coming from your UN rapporteurs who've verified that. And, how do sanctions end up killing people? Well, it's a combination of they don't have the appropriate food, but it's often medical supplies and things like that. And of course, it kills the weakest and the elderly, the babies, the ill. That's who it ends up killing. And apparently our U.S. government looks and says, yeah, we killed a bunch of babies today. Wow, we're winning. It really is just the most morally disgusting treatment.
And that's before COVID. That's before COVID leak. Could you imagine in Cuba and Venezuela, they weren't even allowed to bring syringes to have vaccines. They had to, rely on their Russian and their Chinese allies. The evil devils of the Russia, the Chinese, right? They actually acted humane and helped those nations out.
Right.
But anyways, yeah, let me get into what happened with Saab. So he was working behind the scenes to defy U.S. sanctions and was being quite successful in that. He is the son of immigrants who migrated to the Caribbean part of Colombia, very close to Venezuela, both from the Middle East. His mother Lebanese, and his father was a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. And so he came from a family that were activists on behalf of Palestinians. They were a successful family of business owners in Colombia. He inherited those skills to do business, to negotiate. He migrated to Venezuela in the early 2000s, became a Venezuelan citizen, supported Chavez's government. There's footage out there of Alex Saab with Chavez back when Chavez was alive. Chavez perished about 10 years ago. And so subsequently, through acting as a ally of Chavez's government, he started to serve Maduro in the capacity in 2014? I'm trying to remember. Yes, 2018. That's right. So he's been officially a diplomat of the Bolivarian government of Venezuela since 2018. Involved in the government prior to that as a businessman that was helping them out, but he became official diplomat, and they proved it in court with documents. I was there of Maduro in 2018. It's important to understand also that in 2018, the United States still had diplomatic relations with Venezuela. It wasn't until 2019 when we went down to the Venezuelan embassy that they were throwing diplomats out and that they were rupturing diplomatic relations. So this legal justification of, oh, well, we don't recognize Maduro, therefore he's not a real diplomat, makes no sense, because he became a diplomat, right, when Maduro was still recognized by the United States as president. There was tensions, but there was still diplomatic relations. And so that's been brought up in court as well. And Judge Scolas had complete disregard for the law, for the facts, for the overwhelming evidence. And so they even brought in Venezuelan officials on Zoom, to prove that he's been a diplomat since 2018. Because at first the prosecution was saying, oh, he's only been a diplomat since there's been a rupture. And then they proved it was 2018, so they couldn't keep saying that. But anyways, yeah, let me go into what happened. So,
well, let me just throw in here that most people maybe know this, but diplomats are supposed to have immunity, and not just immunity from doing things like securing food, but they, in most cases, have diplomatic immunity for like killing someone with their car, and we've seen that many times. And there are Americans who have been involved in a hit and run in Britain in the past few years that have gotten off because of diplomatic immunity, and so. That is why it's so important that this guy is a diplomat. It's an important piece. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so this is what happened. So he was traveling on a humanitarian mission. He had done this before to Iran, who were allies of Venezuela. And he was in the process of negotiating further purchases of oil. And actually, before that, the United States had captured Iranian vessels in international waters in an act of piracy and stolen their oil and sold it. That happened under the Trump regime, and similar things have happened under Biden. Just to show you the lengths that they go to try to prevent Venezuela being able to purchase its own oil. And Venezuela does have an abundance of reserve oil. The problem is they don't have the refineries. They don't have the supplies that they need. They don't let them bring it in to refine that oil so they could sell it in their factories. So he was going for his second trip to Iran. He'd already gone there as a diplomat before, had his diplomatic papers with him, diplomatic correspondence between Maduro and the Iranian leader. That was all proven in court. And when he got to North Africa on the way to Iran, they had to refuel. And interestingly enough, a couple of North African nations refused entry. I believe it was Morocco and Algeria. Don't quote me on that. But he was entering North African airspace, and they diverted his plane. They said, you have to turn back. You don't have permission to enter this airspace. Makes me kind of think that maybe the U.S. pressure was there, and the U.S. were telling those governments, hey, if he lands there, you got to capture him for us. I'm like, oh, no, we don't want to deal with that. He's a diplomat. They already knew. He'd done this trip before. And so he had to turn around, and luckily he got to a little island off the coast of Africa called Cape Verde. And so when he arrived in Cape Verde, the authorities immediately manned the plane, completely illegally. And they grabbed him, and he tried to resist. He says, "I'm a diplomat. Here's my papers." And they didn't care. They grabbed him. They beat him up. They forced him from the plane, and they brought him to the dungeon on U.S. orders. And there wasn't even Interpol notice yet. This is interesting about Interpol, Lee. Very few people don't talk about this, but yes, they say there's devil in details, right? And as a writer, I like to look at those details. So there was no Interpol notice. It was just the U.S. It was just Trump telling the Cape Verde authorities, "Better grab this guy." That's it. And the next day, Interpol gives a warrant with the wrong name on it. By the way, under international law, when you nab somebody, the warrant has to be there the same day. But I don't know how they misspelled his name exactly. I didn't see those documents, but I do know that when the notice came in, it wasn't under Alex Saab. And so what ended up happening is we found out much later, and what was not brought up in the court, the judge suppressed it, is that Interpol reversed the warrant because they found out he was a diplomat. So the whole legal justification of the United States saying, "Oh, we're just bringing him here because he has an international warrant," is out the window, because Interpol even knew he was a diplomat, and they reversed it as well. And so that's
just to clarify, because
why he fought
I didn't know this
in court for over a year in Cape Verde. That
sorry, your Wi-Fi was a little glitchy, but just to clarify, I didn't realize that the U.S. claimed that it was
you cut out there. Could you repeat that?
Warrant.
Yeah, that's right. What they claimed was false. And that took a long time to come out, because Interpol didn't want to admit that they were wrong. But they finally came out last year. And it was reported on a little bit in the alternative press, not enough, if you ask me. And the judge mentioned in court, because we all thought they were going to bring it up, that he's received some new information, but it's not relevant. He's not going to permit it to enter the court. And I'm pretty sure that was that information. That would have destroyed the case right there. But, the judge has been extremely biased. He's basically just serving the empire. It's a kangaroo court. I mean, it's like seeing a court proceeding in Britain with Julian Assange. It's a kangaroo court. No insult to kangaroos, right?
Yeah.
But no, I was thinking kangaroos like Australia. That's ironic. But so anyways, he's going to Cape Verde. He's stuck there for over a year. And actually, the UN looked into it, and the African Union also did an investigation. He was tortured. And I don't mean like Assange, which is very serious psychological torture causing him a mini stroke. Right. Physical torture by U.S. agents. It's in a book that was given to me with Alex Saab's letters when I was in Venezuela. I don't think it's been translated to English yet, but there's another book that was translated to English. But anyways, it's revealed now through investigators that he was beaten to the point where he lost teeth. This is a man who's a cancer survivor in remission, thank God, but he had stomach cancer. He was denied his stomach cancer medication. He suffered the consequences of being beaten by U.S. agents. He said they were speaking American English in the room. So these Cape Verdean authorities let these agents in and beat him up for what? To try to get dirt on Maduro? And so he refused to cooperate.
And this is another thing that's not been reported. I've seen little bits and pieces, but not been reported at all by mainstream media, even in their occasional article, that he was beaten to the point of losing teeth.
Oh yeah, I got to tell you, I was with a comrade at the preliminary hearing in Miami, and there was a guy in the elevator. I don't remember his name. He works for CNN Espanol, right? The CNN Spanish, and he was there representing the right-wing press, of course. And we're in the elevator. I said, "What do you think about the torture of Alex Saab?" As soon as those doors open, he went running, because they know about it. They don't report it, but they know. To me, this is not real journalism. You're somebody who's more of a real journalist. I mean, these people are just propagandists, for stenographers, for the establishment.
Yeah. So then there was a bit of a fight as to whether he could be brought back to the United States, right? Extradited to the United States. And ultimately, and I don't know who decided, but ultimately he was.
Yes, that's what happened. So it was about a year, year and a half? So in 2021, October of 2021, I believe he was captured in June of 2020. Yeah. So over a year, he was brought to Miami. That was under the Biden regime. In case you had any, idea that he's different than Trump when it comes to imperialism, they're identical. In some cases, worse, because Biden's doing new sanctions that Trump didn't even do against Nicaragua, for example, for acting in a democratic fashion. But anyways, he was held there. He was tortured there. He refused to give in. Very dignified, very brave man who helped save the lives of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan people. People need to understand that. That's not an exaggeration. He's one of the founders of the CLAP program. Because of his efforts, because of his connections behind the scenes, without any recognition, he was never interested in recognition. He was able to bring in food to save hundreds of thousands alive in that CLAP program. And the United States really wanted him then. So they knew he was diplomat. The emails prove it. It was shown in court. They were trying to find ways. Pompeo even bragged about it in his book. I believe Bolton did as well, that they were trying to find ways to maneuver around the fact that he's a diplomat. But this is the arrogance of these imperialists. They'll even admit what they do and try to profit off it after they leave office.
Yeah.
But the Venezuelans are intelligent. They know. They translate these books. They cite what they say. And they say, look, here's the U.S. empire even admitting it. And it's brought up to Scola, and he just finds ways to maneuver around not recognizing him a diplomat. This is something else. So Judge Scola, when they brought him to Miami on one federal charge, mind you, the other seven charges were dropped. So the only charge that remained, because the other ones had no evidence, it wasn't a deal with Cape Verde. They're just like the vassal states of the U.S. Oh, yeah, this is also important to understand. The people of Cape Verde rose up in an election and voted in somebody who promised to free Alex Saab. Guess what happened the day before the inauguration? What? They extradited him. They call it in Venezuela el segundo secuestro, the second kidnapping. And so that's when they grabbed him a second time and brought him to the United States to prevent him from being free. And they even sent a ship to intimidate Alex Saab. I believe Pompeo admitted this. They had him on house arrest because of pressure from the African Union to release him because of his terrible conditions. His parents died at the time. They wouldn't let his wife and children come. They would let his sister come, but they treated her as a criminal. They had armed guards, like 100 armed guards around the house. It was just a terrible ordeal, insult to injury. And then they brought him to Miami on that one charge that he can still face 20 years for. It's for conspiring to money launder. So every time somebody reports that he is a alleged money launderer, that's false. They're not even accusing him of that. They're only saying that he's a conspirer of money laundering based on hearsay. So there's no evidence. This is a political trial. It's clear. Anybody that attends that court, you don't have to even be a lawyer to understand, that this is clearly a political trial. It's not based on any evidence. So Judge Scola, his last decision was, and this was within days of Guaido being voted out by his own opposition. So Guaido has he's not a politician anymore. He has no position in the government. Scola's like, well, because we don't recognize Maduro, he's still not a diplomat. And what he doesn't realize, apparently, is that Special Envoy Carstens, for example, who goes to Venezuela to negotiate the freeing of Americans that were held there before. He went to Russia. He was part of the Saab with Brittany, what's her name? Brittany Briner, who's in Russia. Right. So this guy, now Carstens is in danger. This is what Judge Scola doesn't realize. That how the law works is it works both ways. So this puts American special envoys that goes to country that don't have diplomatic relations with us in danger now as well. They could charge Carstens very easily with a violation of international law for taking part in sanctions and grab him in Iran, where he's gone to negotiate, grab him in Russia, grab him in his next trip to Venezuela. Scola puts Americans in danger with these types of decisions. But he's so arrogant, he doesn't realize it, I don't think.
And that sounds very similar to what's happened with Assange, where it seems that most of the U.S. media and U.S. courts don't seem to understand that they are putting U.S. journalists at danger because America is setting a precedent that if a country doesn't like something that a journalist has published or written, they can have them arrested anywhere in the world under their own laws, whether they operate in that country or not. It completely puts U.S. journalists at risk.
That's right. And this puts U.S. diplomats at risk as well. And I want to mention, I have the Assange poster up there, but there's a little poster next to it. And that's actually a letter from Alex Saab to me. It's very rare that he's able to get letters out. And it's an interesting little story. I sent certified mail. I found a way finally to reach Saab. And the certified mail disappeared mysteriously. Well, I don't know what happened to it.
What are the odds?
What are the odds, right? And so soon after that, I used my contacts to get a letter sent to him digitally. And within days, Alex Saab wrote me a beautiful letter. And so I was so proud of that I printed up and put it on my wall. But, I mean, this is a guy who's gone through so much. And he's been denied his cancer medication when he was in Cape Verde. I believe he's so afraid now to be retaliated against. He hasn't asked for his cancer medication in Miami. And latest reports is his health is deteriorating. He has vomited dark colored blood. His cancer might be returned. We don't know. But under U.S. law, there's precedent for this. On humanitarian grounds alone, he could be freed, or there could be an exchange with the remaining Americans. The sister of one of the Americans held in Venezuela has said that they should free Alex Saab in exchange for her brother. Also, I think it's Mr. Hernandez. There's an American who sent a letter to Biden that Newsweek revealed, where he's saying that Maduro's willing to release all Americans. I believe there's 5 remaining Americans in exchange for Alex Saab. And yet Biden, who's a coward, still does nothing. And so this just shows the double standards, especially when the United States is dealing with its so-called backyard with nations that have natural resources that the U.S. wants. They want to impose puppets like Guaido. A good example also, I mean, they always use for justification, well, Maduro's a dictator, right? And I'm a lecture observer. I can tell you they're very democratic down there. But the example I like to give is Angela Merkel. You remember a year ago when all the West was ranting and raving of what a wonderful chancellor she was for Germany. She was elected more times than Maduro was.
Right.
But the thing is that she's white and she has no oil. So they deal with it differently. FDR, who's considered one of our greatest presidents, was elected in multiple times. So what it is not Maduro stepping in and say, hey, I want to be elected 3 or 4 times. No, it's a public referendum. There was a public referendum under Chavez. And actually, the first attempt failed.
We're losing your internet a little bit.
The first attempt would have been fine. So they did a referendum. It was very close. They tried to do it at the next year. This was back during Chavez, and it passed. And ever since then, there's not been another attempt to reverse it. I mean, there hasn't been a successful attempt to reverse it because most people like it. The referendums in the country, important regions where the opposition won, where they have Venezuela, which is the party of Maduro and Chavez. That's how, right? But there's opposition. And so anyways, Alex Saab became an admirer of Chavez, a supporter of his government, using his business ties to do that, a legitimate business. Okay, here's another thing important to understand. If you Google Alex Saab, you're going to get a ton of lies. Yeah. What you need to do is Google free Alex Saab. And one of those lies, which I'm happy to address, is calling him a collaborator or an asset of the DEA. That's just utterly ridiculous. It's important to understand in 2013, when Chavez died, they tried the same thing. Back then, the DEA claimed that Maduro was their agent against Cabello, who's the number 3 in the government, to try to cause division. These are just false claims. And not only that, Maduro actually admitted that when Alex Saab first became his diplomat in 2018, that he okayed him to meet with the DEA because the DEA were making false charges against him, saying he had, allegedly some drug ties to one of his businesses he left behind in Colombia. And so he met with DA with Maduro's permission to clear his name. That's it. But they used that mean to say, oh, we have other meetings. Oh, he was our collaborator. How are you going to torture somebody who's collaborating with you? It's ridiculous.
And just to talk about some of this propaganda that you're mentioning, if you look at this Reuters article, they say U.S. not negotiating new Venezuela prisoner swap despite appeal. And they just say Venezuela prisoner. They don't call him a diplomat. Then down here, they say Alex Saab, a Colombian-born businessman facing trial. So they go out of their way to make sure no one consider him a diplomat.
Well, not only that, JFK's father was a businessman who became a diplomat. It's not unheard of for a business person to become a diplomat. That's one of the criticisms, too. They say, oh, well, he's not a real diplomat. He's just a corrupt business guy. It's like, no, there's plenty of people that went from business into diplomacy. And it makes sense to think about it because when you're doing business deals, you're negotiating. And what do diplomats do? They negotiate. It's pretty common sense here, but there's a lot of media manipulation.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit put out by our government. What do you think? What do you think is the goal? What's the U.S. getting out of this?
They want to deceive the masses, and they also want to send a message to the third world, especially the global south, that if you don't follow our orders, if you defy our sanctions, we're going to go after you, and we're going to go after you brutally, and we don't care about your diplomatic immunity. That's how empires work. They want to send a message, and then to the masses, they deceive them and tell a story to justify what they're doing. And that's why it's important to look up books like the recently translated book from Adriana Parada. I can send you the link so people can find out how to read that for free. Also, my book under Al Suarez, you see that's part of my Twitter name, The Diplomat, also in a couple languages. That reveals what's going on with Alex Saab. So there are great sites, Mint Press, for example, that have done good work about saying the truth of Venezuela, the truth of Alex Saab's case. So there are ways out there to get educated on the topic without relying on, the corporate press and Google and, the blatant lies that they tell about him.
Let's see. In a second here, I think I can. Oh, damn it! I thought I had your book here to pull up, but now I've lost it.
I can send you a link in the chat if you like. But some things that are similar, for example, between the Assange and the Saab case is the extraterritorial nature of this, right? That you can grab somebody in a third country who wasn't even going to the United States. Right. For the act of journalism, for the act of diplomacy. And by the way, according to international law, the unilateral coercive measures, also known as sanctions, are illegal. So he was combating something that was illegal that another government was doing and imposing upon him. Yeah, that's it. And for that, he's been punished. So he needs to be freed.
What?
He's a hero. He needs to be returned to his family. And it's a responsibility that whenever there's a hearing again in Miami, that we bring all the comrades down to show our support. There was a lot of us outside the court because where all the exiles live, but they don't want to show up apparently.
Can you talk about? What has happened in the court proceedings in Miami? Like how many hearings have there been, and what happens next?
Mm-hmm. I believe there was 4 dates in total. So there was back in the beginning in late 2021 when he was brought. Right, that's why I first went. There was like a couple preliminary hearings, and then there was the hearing on his diplomatic status. That's very important. Those were the last ones. It was over the course of 3 days in Miami late last year. So I was there, and I met with different comrades there. Leo Flores was there. Speaking of Code Pink, because he used to be with Code Pink, it's important to stress also that Michelle Elner, who's Venezuelan American, just like Leo, she's currently one of the Latin American coordinators for Code Pink. Her Twitter page was taken down the other day when she tried to post about Alex Saab's deteriorating health. So hopefully she returns. But the diplomatic status hearing was very important because that was like an appeal saying, hey, we can't go further, Judge, because he's a diplomat. So let's look into this. So Scola looked into it. Scola was appointed by Obama, by the way. He's a liberal. But I said when he made his last decision, I said there's no difference between Scalia or Scola when it comes to imperialism, right?
Right.
But anyways,
liberals seem to be more into war and belligerence than some Republicans. So.
Absolutely, especially libertarian Republicans lately, right, and how they vote. And so the diplomatic status, the judge was basically trying to find ways to justify. And that's something else I mentioned. I'm going to repeat that within days of the judge's decision, the opposition voted out Guaido, so he's not even a politician anymore. Never even ran for president. So I said, what's the U.S. going to say in the appeal? Are they going to say we're recognizing an invisible president? We can't name you who it is. But because of this invisible president, and it's not Maduro, that's why he's not a diplomat. It's like saying, we know it was a pro-Ukraine group that blew up the pipeline. We just can't tell you who. I mean, who are going to believe these lies? Are people that brainwashed to believe such clear lies? He said because we don't work with Maduro, he's not a real diplomat. Therefore, we have to hold him against all the overwhelming evidence that he's been a diplomat since 2018. Dozens of witnesses, like this equivalent of a Supreme Court judge in Venezuela, spoke on Zoom, and some of the questions they asked were just, I was laughing even before they translated to English, right? Because I speak Spanish. But some of us who were supportive of Alex Saab were laughing in the courtroom because, the prosecution would ask things like to the Venezuelan official, so the Guaido government in Mexico, when you met with them, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, excuse me, there is no Guaido government in Mexico or anywhere else. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Because they were trying to catch them by, to admit that Guaido's government's legit. And Guaido's a joke. His own opposition voted him out, for God's sakes. He's a traitor. He can't show his face in Venezuela without being stoned. Or I just saw a video of him the other day being thrown out of a restaurant. He can't appear publicly. He always has these U.S.-funded security guys around him. He's a total traitor.
And when the U.S. declared Guaido the president of Venezuela, with, like you said, never receiving one vote for president of Venezuela, polls showed that 80% of Venezuelans had never heard his name.
Exactly. He wasn't known until he was appointed by Trump to be the president of Venezuela. He was an official in the National Assembly. He wasn't a very important one.
Right. How is Venezuela doing right now? Do you have updates on how the country's doing with the sanctions? And there was a brief moment where it seemed like the U.S. might be easing some things because the U.S. now needs Venezuelan oil.
So in exchange for the Chevron purchase of oil, which helped a little bit the Venezuelan economy, not much, Maduro's nephews that were held on trumped-up charges, this is years before Alex Saab, were released and sent back to Venezuela, and a couple Americans that were in Venezuela were returned to the United States. I know for a fact that part of that deal, they were demanding that Alex Saab be freed, but they're still holding him. And again, in case you're just tuning in now, the sister of one of the American hostages said they should free Alex Saab in exchange for her brother. And one of the hostages themselves, Mr. Hernandez, I believe his name is, wrote to President Biden, and Newsweek reported, mainstream press, so-called mainstream, that letter saying that the government was willing to release all Americans, I believe 5 Americans that remain, in exchange for Alex Saab. It's still not being done. They have some theory that they tortured him for years, and suddenly he's going to come out with some secret information that's going to make sure that people topple Maduro. I don't know. It's just sort of believing that the sanctions make Maduro unpopular. It makes him more popular, if anything. So the people are suffering from this. They can't get their cancer medications. They can't get food. The elderly, the children, under COVID, it got worse, although they had vaccines from other countries that helped. But, I went there to not just to observe elections. They brought me to factories. And I went to factories where they're starting to export even. I went to a plastic factory where a lot of the socialist women are in important positions, the socialist feminists in the government. So it's a very progressive country that's rising up despite these terrible sanctions that have killed the equivalent of 30 million Americans. I mean, if you think about that 30 million figurely, there was approximately 30 million Soviets that were killed in World War II, more than any other nation, by the Nazis. So that's equivalent to what we've done to them as of 2020 for those couple of years of a sanction. Those numbers have gone up. But those numbers are not going up as drastically because of people like Alex Saab and because of the allies of Venezuela. And
you're talking about
Venezuelan people. What's that?
You're talking about per capita. If the per capita
yes.
killing had been done to the U.S., it would be 30 million. Yeah.
The U.S. figures, I looked it up. Right. It'd be about 30 million. Right. Because we have over 300 million people. So we have a much larger population than Venezuela. But just to give you an idea of the effect it is on the population.
Yeah.
I believe it's about, as of 2020, to 100,000. According to the UN, according to somebody mentioned Clinton sanctions. I mean, I wouldn't even put a last name on it. It's just imperialist sanctions that continue, no matter if it's Trump, Obama, Biden, although Biden, I'm getting the name wrong again. Sorry. I need more coffee. Although Obama sanctions were very light in comparison to Trump and Biden's. But Biden's sanctions are even more vicious to Trump to a degree. I mean, he made new sanctions against Nicaragua after their election, shortly after I was in Venezuela. But the left's rising up in Latin America. It's very inspiring in Brazil and Honduras and Nicaragua and Venezuela. The left is making gains. I don't want to say Chile. Chile is kind of a centrist government. I mean, it's better than fascists like Pinochet types. But, you see the left and progressives rising up in Latin America. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, and of course, the U.S. continues to attempt the same old games, succeeding in some places, such as the lawfare coup done in Peru. And they also... There were 2 coups in 1 week. The other one was to stop the vice president in Argentina from running for president, and they succeeded in that with a similar lawfare coup. And yeah, this is the U.S. is continuing to do all of these tactics because we, by the Monroe Doctrine, consider Latin America to be our backyard. We own it. We get to decide who is in power in these countries. And the U.S. empire does not like socialist governments, doesn't like leftist governments, doesn't even like a government that's does slightly left-wing things, and will, often promote or bring down a slightly left-wing government and put in place a fascist one like Bolsonaro.
Absolutely. In Argentina, the president, Alberto Fernandez, is a centrist. However, who's a leftist is his vice president, who used to be president of Argentina. She was very close with Chavez, Cristina Fernandez. Not only did they go after her in the courts to prevent her from running again and threaten her with prison, although because of her age, she doesn't get to go to prison in Argentina. I believe when you're 70 or up, you don't have to go to prison there. But they also tried to kill her. There was a guy with links to the opposition who put a gun in her face, and luckily the gun didn't go off, but very close to killing her. And you're right, it was right around the time of the ousting of Pedro Castillo from my father's nation, Peru. Pedro Castillo is a great man. He refused to resign. He's still being held in jail with full U.S. support in Peru. So that was a reverse Peru, unfortunately. You have Belarte, who's a centrist serving the right wing in power now, but the people are rising up there as well. Rio Grande, these gains of the left. Hey, how'd you guys get your act together? How can we get our act together and take power like you guys did? That was one of my main questions to them. I asked several Venezuelans that, including ones that didn't speak English because I'm fluent in Spanish, and I got different answers. One of the most interesting answers was leadership, charisma. Chavez, he brought all these people that were divided throughout the 90s together by the year 2000, the new century of Bolivarian socialism. But yeah, Chavez was an incredibly charismatic person. Maduro does not have his charisma, but Maduro is still a great man, very brave, and he has great people around him, or did, like Alex Saab. So hopefully he'll be returned. It'll definitely be a victory for us, for the anti-imperialists.
What can folks do to try and help secure freedom for Alex Saab? Is there anything you feel that Americans or Venezuelans or anybody around the world can do that is, more than just tweeting about it?
Speak to your everyday people about it. Keep bringing it up. I would say Assange is a lot more known than Alex Saab, which is great. Alex Saab, Julian Assange is a great guy, but people bring up Assange and their dinner tables, whether they're right or left, and there's conversations about him. Start doing that for Alex Saab as well. So don't just try to bring awareness online, face to face. And speaking of face to face, I want to mention that I'm organizing an event. I was in DC back on the 18th handing out flyers about this. It's an anti-imperialist event that I would like comrades to go to. We don't want to make it a big, massive event, but it's going to be in the campgrounds, kind of a vanguard group to educate, make workshops. It's going to be outside of Gainesville, Florida. You can DM me on Twitter to find out about it. It's called Rage Against Imperialism. So it's not like the Rage Against the War Machine, but it's Rage Against Imperialism. We're our own thing. And we have Anti-Imperialist America is involved, Revolutionary Alliance involved, and other groups. Possibly a Hoover movement. We're in contact with them too in St. Pete, Florida, to try to get them up. And so, yeah, we need to continue to do events face to face. That's important to inspire one another. I might be back in DC at the end of April before the Rage Against Imperialism event. We'll see. It's supposed to be the first weekend of May, 6th and 7th of May. It's also to commemorate May Day, International Workers' Day. And so, yeah, I think we need to do that. We need to set up camps. We need to speak with our families, with our friends face to face. And Alex Saab's name needs to get out there so that Biden feels embarrassed, and not out of the goodness of his heart, but out of political survivor. He's going to say, okay, this makes it look bad. We're going after Diplomat. We need to release him. So hopefully that's what happens, because God forbid Alex Saab, who's in a deteriorating health, doesn't get the help he needs and dies.
Lost the feed there for a minute. Hoping it comes back. Maybe if he logs on.
Yeah, looks like we're cutting out.
I think we might have you back. Try logging out and logging back in, maybe.
I'm back.
All right, maybe we'll have him back in a moment. But yeah, I mean, that he was mentioning, like, make it embarrassing to these leaders, and I think that is part of it. That's a big part of it. It's not that we think that Biden or the Biden administration, or let's be honest, the people that actually tell Biden what to do, because he doesn't even know what room he's in. It's not that they would do it out of the goodness of their heart. They're not going to go, oh, we suddenly care about Alex Saab. It's that they're going to start to feel shame, and they're going to start to think that it might hurt their political ambitions, and therefore they might free him. That is also the hope I have for Julian Assange. Although it's been a long time of trying to get Julian Assange freed.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right when I was saying something important, I cut out. It's like a conspiracy, right? What was it? What was the last thing I was saying?
You were talking about making the leaders feel enough shame that they actually free the man.
Absolutely. And I said that because of Alex Saab's deteriorating health, if God forbid he does die in a U.S. jail, the whole world will want to rise up against the United States. And it would definitely hurt our diplomats, like Special Envoy Carstens. He could very easily be nabbed in any of those countries he's negotiating with. It puts everything at risk. He needs to be treated. He needs to get his medication, and he needs to be freed.
So you've written a book on Alex Saab. You've written on the Embassy Collective. What are you working on now?
Well, I was writing an alternative fiction called If Che Won, Che Guevara has always been one of my heroes. He was actually a diplomat at one time as well for the Cuban government. I've kind of put a pause on that. It's really hard to write fiction. It would have been only the second fiction I ever wrote out of the 15 books that I've written. It's much easier to write nonfiction, at least for me.
Right.
But I am trained as a journalist. I have a bachelor's degree in communications, but I have issues with the media, especially the media here in the U.S. empire and how they treat people like Assange. That kind of made me disappointed with them and focus more on my writing. So,
right. Well, I want to remind everybody to check out your book.
Appreciate it.
It's called The Diplomat. It's I found it here on Spanish Amazon, but I assume it's available elsewhere.
Yeah, it's in Italian, English, and Spanish right now. Somebody's working on a Portuguese translation. I have a comrade who might translate it to French soon as well, so more people can know about it in Europe. There are European parliamentarians, though, like in Spain, who have spoken out on behalf of Alex Saab. So that's good. That's got some attention in Europe. It would be great if politicians here in the United States would speak out on it as well. But I've just been disappointed with politicians in general lately and how they're voting and how, they're trying to prolong this war in Ukraine. By the way, the relations between Russia and China and Latin America are better than they ever been. And the relations between Russia and China now, and you were just in China recently, are the best that they've ever been. And this is a lot of it is a consequence of U.S. foreign policy and people being pissed at the United States, especially in the global South and Africa. Their relations with the East is better, and Latin America is uniting with Africa. Like when I went to observe elections there, I have to admit there were several African people there. It was beautiful to see this all there. Every single North African country, for example, was present, not just several sub-Saharan Africans. And the only North African nation that did not go was Morocco. Interestingly enough, and that's because Venezuela recognizes the independence of Western Sahara, which is under Moroccan.
Unfortunately, we've lost his internet again, but that's all right. We were pretty much at the end of the interview, but I want to thank Alex Suarez again for coming on and everything he had to say. I hope that I know it was spotty internet at times, but I hope that you got most of those incredibly important points, and I hope you check out his book, The Diplomat. If you hopefully that won't be when you're reading the book. Hopefully it won't glitch out. That'd be kind of weird, but yeah. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I do these interviews twice a week. I've just talked to recently to amazing people like Stella Assange, Julian Assange's wife, Richard Wolff, so many great people. And I hope that you will check out all those interviews. I also have a new episode of The Most Censored News that just came out on how the rich are prepping for the end times. By the way, thanks you, Michael, for the donation. Thanks for supporting this. And yeah, so I have a new episode of Most Censored News. Just came out yesterday. It's at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. I hope you go and watch it there. And I will see you again, let's see, in a few days. So thanks again, everybody. Please support us at patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. And I will see you next week. Keep fighting.